The Secretary of State Marco Rubio has recently put sanctions on Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967. I believe that's her full title. She's been the UN Special Rapporteur since 2022. She has been recently re-elected to that position by the Human Rights Council. And yeah, she's finally getting sanctioned. Today we'll talk about that. We'll talk about her reaction. She was on Al Jazeera as soon as it happened. So that already tells you a little bit about her. And we'll talk about what she said recently, what she said on that show. As well as, yeah, general reaction of media. Joining me today are Nicolas Provenzo, Alejandro, and Jonathan Honig. Hey guys, thank you for joining me today. And I'll jump to you first, Nicolas. So, yeah, I'm not sure if we had you on when we talked about Francesca Albanese. We talked about her a couple of times. But yeah, as just your first thoughts, what do you make of, let's say, her work from what you know?
What to make of her work? Oh, it's a precious thing. It's a lovely thing. I think in a certain sense it would be useful to get the other side's opinion in any sort of debate. I don't know if she's the best person to do that. It seems like she has a not. It seems like she has a horrific bias against Israel, and that limits her credibility. If her mission is to observe human rights in the Middle East area under continuous contention, then what would you want in a person tasked to do that? You'd want objectivity. You'd want impartiality. You'd want someone who's looking at perceptual level facts and relaying them without bias. That is not this lady. So any kind of action on part of the United States to expose her bias, to point it out, to condemn it, I think is a positive step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that already brings me to, I think, one of the main things about when it comes to these positions. It's sort of like expecting objectivity from the UN chief, who is elected by, in large majority, dictatorships. You can never expect somebody good to be in that position. To be in that position, you already have to have a certain sort of, I think, bias. We can talk about that later. Alejandro, your opening thoughts?
My opening thoughts about this woman, or my opening thoughts about the whole matter?
Both of them, yeah.
So, I mean, I think, first of all, this entity is simply despicable. I think it's at the height of Walter Duranty and his whole scam during the Soviet Union. I think she is simply disgusting. However, I see this issue as another episode of the US's schizophrenic way of dealing with things. I see this as a domino chain of moral sanction of really bad entities being supported by less and less evil bad entities and so on, going up to the US, which is in essence supporting the whole existence of the UN by its moral authority, and the UN supporting Albanese's hideous and false comments. I'm not a fan of sanctions, in essence, because I think they're too whimsical and too open to the government's and the executive's power will, regardless of judicial review. But sincerely, I think it would be more interesting and more important if the US would simply say, UN, goodbye.
Yeah,
I have to say, I like that a lot, Alejandro. And, Ayn Rand hated the UN. And I want to quickly quote a little bit from her article, The Shanghai Gesture, from the Ayn Rand letter. When an institution reaches the degree of corruption, brazen cynicism, and dishonor demonstrated by the UN in its shameful history, to discuss it at length is to imply that its members and supporters may possibly be making an innocent error about its nature, which is no longer possible. I mean, the UN is there, in my opinion, this is me talking now, to whitewash these terrible ideas, to give them, in effect, a seat at the table, to put the US right there next to whether it be Soviet Russia or Putin's Russia or Cuba or the worst dictatorships in the world. They legitimize them every single day. And this is a woman who, from what I understand, she's not even able to practice law. She's kind of a lawyer in name only. But putting that aside, her whole je ne sais quoi is that she's a big macher at the UN. To Alejandro's point, why are we even in the UN? Why are we sanctioning the whole travesty, which is the UN? I've long driven by that building on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and thought, there's your cool modern condos and the big General Assembly. What an awesome, Disney-esque movie theater that might make one day. So the UN is corrupt. I think sanctions are milquetoast. And the real answer is just to divorce the U.S. from the UN forever. And for everyone who says, oh, U.S. should get out of NATO, NATO at least serves a legitimate purpose. What is the purpose of the UN other than to minimize the catastrophes that are so many of these dictatorship tin pot countries?
Yeah, and sort of going further on this idea of what even is the point of the UN. So we have the sanctions are of course done by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He posted on the state government website, and as justification he used the Trump's Executive Order 14203 imposing sanctions on the International Criminal Court, basically accusing Albanese of directly engaging with the ICC in efforts to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute nationals of the United States or Israel, basically saying that neither the US nor Israel are the signatories to the Rome Statute, meaning they cannot be pursued by the ICC. Of course, the sort of argument of the ICC is, since the Palestinian territories are technically the signatories to the ICC, since the alleged crimes of Netanyahu have been pursued in Gaza, which technically are part of the Palestinian territories, that's why ICC has a jurisdiction. Now, all of that is a BS. I don't know how to even deal with this amount of sort of like different kinds of international law. So I mean, to go to you, Nicholas, again, you are somebody who can practice law, unlike somebody who we are talking about today. Yeah, I mean, what really... We'll go to a video that I want to watch, and I'll bring up one thing from the video. She keeps repeating that Israel is committing genocide. She keeps accusing Netanyahu, the defense minister, sort of the former defense minister Yoav Gallant, I'm not sure if she did it with the same one, of committing war crimes. But sort of like a question for you as a lawyer would be, what would happen if during a trial you kept accusing the person who is on trial of being a murderer? You refer to him as a murderer while he is on trial for that own thing, because this is what Francesca Albanese is doing. Israel has not been convicted.
Well, it's a rhetorical trick called a conclusory argument. You've made the conclusion. The conclusion that the fact finder should make is that the party is or is not committing genocide. But it'd be one thing to say, I will prove to you that they committed genocide because I will show you X, Y, and Z through testimony and documentary evidence and physical evidence, and therefore you will be able to find as follows. That's leading the fact finder to a decision through the facts. But to declare, you are committing this or you have done that without that is just, it's called a conclusory complaint, a conclusory argument. An argument without evidence, but nevertheless assumes a legal finding. So, and that's a no-no, and professionals would spot that and find flaw with it. She seems, that's her, as Jonathan would say, her je ne sais quoi. And
her whole reason she has any prestige at all,
I'm just looking at the first sentence of her the paper that she put out. What is it? Human rights situation in Palestine and the occupied territories. Colonial endeavors and associated genocides have historically been driven and enabled by the corporate sector. I mean, like what out the gate? Yeah, them corporations and their genocide.
Yeah, we got it all in there.
I mean, I mean, there's Ford for you. There's General Motors, and I mean, it's just,
But what makes her voice resonate is her, in my opinion, from what I've seen, is her position at the UN.
It gives her an imprimatur that she could never have on her own. I absolutely agree, John.
And Miss Rand, again, this is from Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Now, Miss Rand mentions communism, but I believe you could slip in Islamism here. But so I'm going to do it, quoting Miss Rand now. When the Islamist world has gained a moral sanction, a stamp of civilized respectability from the Western world. It has gained the West's assurance in deceiving its victims. It has gained the status and prestige of an equal partner, thus establishing the notion that the difference between human rights and mass slaughter is merely a difference of political opinion. So, in effect, transforming what she was observing with the Soviets in the 60s and 70s to modern day with the Islamists, giving them a sanction that they don't deserve, that they haven't earned.
Yeah, and to jump to you, Alejandro, I would go again now focus on her specific position. So again, UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967. I know it's a mouthful. There are positions of the UN Special Rapporteurs. It's under the Human Rights Council, and the job of them is basically, I think there's one for Belarus, one for North Korea, one for Iran. The job of them is to go into those countries, or if they cannot go to those countries, basically try to report on what's happening in those countries, report it to the Human Rights Council, and report to the country itself of basically how to better itself. Now, when it comes to Israel, it's something unique. It's specifically after Israel has been threatened by surrounding countries, it had to take over and occupy the surrounding areas, meaning Gaza and what would we call Judea and Samaria, or some people call West Bank. And since then, this position has been created to specifically report, even when Israel pulled out, to specifically report on Israeli violations to Israel, not to Palestinian territories, not about the gross violations by Hamas or by the PLO, no, by Israel. So how can you even achieve objectivity if your whole goal is to report on one side? I mean, again, imagine you have the Russian-Ukrainian war and you are a special rapporteur for Ukraine. So you don't talk about Russia, you don't talk about how we got here, you only report on everything bad Ukraine is doing. That's not what I would call objectivity.
Well, I certainly agree. And there are so many things that could be said upon this, but let me tell you about two. The first one is that international law is the wet dream of any dictatorship mindset. Any people that want reality to appear like it does, this is the perfect way. Traditionally, a law is a type of written law that essentially helps people to identify the violation of a right, and it's applied upon a specific territory and under certain types of guidelines, so that the innocent can prevail and the guilty can be identified. You have nothing like that in international law. It makes antitrust law look like the Magna Carta in contrast. This this kind of people come out from that because and thrive upon that kind of environment, because if there is no way in which the innocent can be justified and identified, and in this case and in the general case of the history of Israel, the innocent has been Israel, and the guilty have been the Arabs, and most recently what we identify as the Palestinians. Then the only way that the people that can thrive and can flourish in such kind of environment are the people who will blame anything on the innocent and will punish and will make the guilty less whitewashed what they do.
And somebody in the chat says, if the charges were false and easily debunked, why are they being so petty? That assumes objective law. That assumes that there is sort of an objective law on the books that you can defend yourself against and that you can prove your innocence in a just court. This is simply not what ICJ is. ICJ has absolutely nothing to give against Israel. The sort of the trial against Israel started weeks or months into the conflict. There is no way you could prove anything, and they still haven't provided any evidence besides some statements.
Can I just throw up, this is one thing now I observe in the blogosphere and Twitter, etc. now, is this notion of globalism. And when you say you're a globalist, people assume you're for international law. And Ms. Rand, as I understand it, was not for international law. What I understand globalist is to be an advocate for international trade. And that's the irony, is people are against, at least in America, most people I talk to are against international law and international trade. But Ms. Rand, I believe, wrote explicitly about the danger and the evil of international law in a new textbook of Americanism. So be a globalist in terms of trade, not in terms of law, is my opinion.
Yeah, and I want to watch her appearance on Al Jazeera, but before that, I should remind people about the Irreplaceable Spark Conference. It's an event we are planning later this year. Link to that is objectivism.co.uk. And before we move on, let's actually hear from one of the people who will be there.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Honig from CapitalistPig.com and the Fox Business Network, inviting you to join me for the Irreplaceable Spark Conference. That's October 25th through 26th in Orange County, California. We will be talking all about applying objectivism to your life, real world stuff, how to become happier, more successful, more content, and more fulfilled. I'm also excited about not just meeting a lot of objectivists and admirers of Ayn Rand, but coaching them, mentoring them as well. So check it out, the Irreplaceable Spark Conference, October 25th through 26th. I'll see you there.
So
looking forward to that. I hope many of our viewers will make the trek and join us.
So objectivism.co.uk, you can get your tickets. You can also use the code ARCUK Premium to get $100 off the premium ticket, as well as ARCUK VIP to get $200 off the VIP ticket. And I should mention that this is not a conference just for objectivists. I think even people who are simply interested in ideas and would like to pursue a successful life, I think will be able to get a lot out of this conference. And if you like what Jonathan has been saying on the shows, he will be one of the people you'll be able to meet there, as well as many others. So yeah, now let's listen a little bit from Francesca Albanese on Al Jazeera.
UN officials and global human rights organizations have criticized a US move imposing sanctions against the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. Francesca Albanese has been critical of Israel's genocide in Gaza and has voiced support for the International Criminal Court's efforts to try Israeli leaders. On Wednesday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio accused her of anti-Semitism. Amnesty International called the decision a graceful affront to international justice. Well, Marco Rubio posted on X saying, "I'm imposing sanctions on UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese for her illegitimate and shameful efforts to prompt international criminal court action against US and Israeli officials, companies and executives." He also said her campaign of political and economic warfare against the United States and Israel will no longer be tolerated. Well, joining us is Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. She's in the Slovenian capital, Ljubljana. Ms. Albanese, always a pleasure to have you with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you for your time. Firstly, your initial reaction to these sanctions, and can you talk us through exactly what they are?
I cannot, because I'm still evaluating the impact. Of course, it's. I agree. I'm happy that the Human Rights Council, members of the Human Rights Council, and the Office of the High Commissioner, the UN, the human rights community has reacted, criticizing and asking for the reversal of these measures because it's obscene, frankly. But right now, I want to remind everyone that the reason why these sanctions have been imposed is the pursuit of justice. Of course, I've been critical of Israel. It has been committing genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes, and not because I say that. There are criminal proceedings and international...
Okay, so here is already the first part. So one, saying that she is pursuing the justice, it doesn't even invert the concept of justice. I think it completely obliterates it. And then again, she goes on. Of course, she is being targeted. She's accusing, or no, she's saying that Israel is committing a genocide. Israel is committing war crimes. And it's not just her. It's ICJ, it's ICC. So again, complete dishonesty. None of those have officially said that either of those is true, because it's not something you can have done in such a short period of time. Yet she keeps repeating that. Nicholas, your thoughts on what she said?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating just listening to her speak and then looking at her paper. She's definitely borrowing a lot of pages from the left in attacking corporations for things that she claims she doesn't like. It's interesting to try and figure out exactly what United States law is here, because I was looking up, what obligations does American law impose upon overseas corporations in their conduct, and there are some, but the U.S. position is not to delegate its authority to an institution like the International Criminal Court for corporate activities. It wants to delegate in a certain sense where it makes sense. And you look at the history of the International Criminal Court, there are cases, it's been going on for 50, 60 years, where there's a dispute between Nicaragua and Costa Rica or something like that, where if you were going to have a forum to resolve that dispute, would you put it? You wouldn't put it in a U.S. court. So I could see someone thinking that it was a good idea to create these institutions to resolve that kind of dispute that couldn't be resolved in an American court. But the problem is it a fair court? If it's populated by people like Miss Albanese, then obviously it's not. She's so nakedly ideologically driven with a very repellent, anti-Semitic, leftist. I'm kind of at a loss for words just how vile she is, ideologically, philosophically. What do you get is it even a fair hearing? And then that goes back to the argument, is the UN even a fair hearing when it's populated with dictatorships, when it's populated with things that only give evil sanction? Can you even hope that it would be a worthwhile institution? And the answer is no.
Even participating in, honestly, Nicola, even participating in it, hosting it, I think, gives it sanction. And, I can't remember if it was Dr. Brooke or Dr. Peikoff at one point suggested something to the effect that maybe the U.S. could start like a League of Free Nations. And who knows, maybe it could start with the U.S., Israel, and the United Kingdom, and a very strict, criteria on membership. And let's make that the cool international global, association to be part of. And ditch just the sanction that the UN itself gives, not to mention the hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars it gobbles up year after year after year.
Yeah, it's not the benefit that you get. Like the one benefit that I could think of is like the Yugoslavian war back in the 90s. The
benefit was the time before.
Right, you got to go back 30 years to find something.
I mean, when you needed to have everyone sitting in a room together, maybe then it had a use.
Yeah, I mean something
I'm sorry,
to.
Nicholas. Excuse me. I cut you
No,
off.
no. We're in agreement. In a situation like this, I always like to try and figure out, like, well, what was the rationale for it in the first place, and was the rationale itself flawed, or was there a screw up along the way, and why? The problem, so the UN, the goal of the UN was a forum of nations, like Jonathan just described, but it admitted Iran, admitted Soviet Union, it admitted
It
China.
started with Soviet Union,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. And the thought was, well, we have to admit them because the failure to the failure of the League of Nations that preceded the UN was that it didn't admit the key players. So you want all the key players at a table, and I can get that. But as
yeah, I'm not
Jonathan
even
points
sure
out,
if that was true, because Nazi Germany, Italy, Russia, Japan were all in the League of Nations.
well, it was the U.S. wasn't in there, so it was the U.S. that weakened the U.S.'s lack of participation. The argument goes is what weakened the League of Nations as an effective force.
Yeah, but
the UN was supposed to correct that, but now you got the flip side of every tin pot dictatorship is going up there, and I love how many times Israel's the target of UN action, not.
And here was Rand's line from Capitalism and the Unknown on the UN. What would you expect from a crime-fighting committee whose board of directors included the leading gangsters of the community? There's the UN.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to sort of like bring it in, I think when it comes to the idea of international organizations, as sort of like Nicholas pointed out a bit, when there are disputes between now, usually disputes between free nations have been able to been resolved pretty peacefully even without international organization. But let's say you want some, I think there is actual case for some equalization of law, let's say for like intellectual property, to make it easier, maybe accepting of drugs, basically one nation accepts it and all of these. But whenever there is a good idea, let's say the four of us want to like create a podcast or something, and then somebody say, okay, but let's also invite these 12 people who don't know how to speak to that. What do you expect to happen after that? And this was the UN, right? It was a bunch of free nations who said, okay, but let's also invite every single dictatorship that is on the planet just because they were able to somehow take control of some parts of area. Because this is what most of the countries in the UN are. This is what most people, let's say Francesca Albanese has been voted in as the UN Special Rapporteur, majority of those countries were dictatorships. And as Nicola said, of course you have anti-Israel bias. Most of the biggest sort of like a bloc is anti-Israel bloc that just always votes together, always goes anti-Israel. So yeah, I mean, Alejandro.
They game the system and quite horrifically.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
why subsidize it?
When not
get?
even game them, we gave it to them, and and now there is like an automatic thing that when there is an international organization, it's automatically UN. So Alejandro, why? Like I'm thinking of something like UNESCO. Why do like World Heritage sites have to be dealt with dictatorships, with the approval of dictatorships, the upholding of individual rights or the human rights, as call them, upholding of anything?
Well, again, it's this kind of non-objective law, including these heritage sites, it's non-objective. And who thrives in an environment of non-objective law? It's not the innocent. The innocent and just need objective law. The guilty, the robbers, the killers, they flourish upon non-objective law because they can claim themselves to be a victim. They can claim themselves to be the people who take care of things in town. And in my view, I mean, the things that they take care of things as worthy of being kept usually are not worth being kept. And if you're unlucky enough to be owner of one of these sites, it's like hell for you because essentially, I mean, I really here in the UK we have I don't remember the name of the legal terminology, but this in essence, if you live or you own a certain type of building, and the government deems it of national or historical interest, basically your chances to use it as you want to use it are significantly diminished, and that's part as well of the non-objective law of land.
Yeah, just to add one thing there, I'm not sure who said it to me, but I think it was somebody in London who said they live in a building that survived the Blitz during World War II. So now that pretty much means nothing can happen to the building. You cannot change that building. You have to preserve it as it is because of this one thing.
Well, just think big picture, and for those maybe who aren't following this woman's work so closely in particular, just think big picture of how much legitimacy the UN has brought to the whole climate change. I mean, so much of what the UN has done in recent decades is a bit about, the evils of climate change, which of course means corporations and progress. So this is now just them applying that same philosophy perspective to the Middle East. And, it reminds me of something that Dr. Peikoff said on one of his podcasts and I'm paraphrasing, I love the line, but he said that the ecology movement was something that the hippies picked up once the Vietnam War ended. And I feel like it's so much the same now. As so many of the young, marchers and the young, advocates, are now on the side of the Palestinians because that's what's hip. That's what's cool. The environmental movement, that's kind of yesterday's business. Now what's cool is being like Greta, wearing the keffiyeh, shouting out about Israel's oppression and devastation and genocide. So, it's become almost culturally hip. Not surprising considering women like this, Francesca, are not only at the UN, but they're at high-powered institutions and schools all over the country.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. A super chat from Boy. Thank you so much. He says, like and subscribe or Albanese will claim you dated. Oh, yeah. So make sure to like and subscribe. Otherwise, this will be a stain on your record. We have a super chat from Ginger. Thank you so much. He says, I'll be at the Irreplaceable Spark conference. So many interesting people. So much to learn. Yeah, that's objectivism.co.uk. You can buy your tickets. We have a super chat from Alexei. Thank you so much. He says, great reporting, guys. Thanks. And with that, let's listen a little bit more from Francesca.
Court of Justice proceedings against Israel for these crimes. Isn't it enough? And what I've exposed is that this genocide doesn't only go ahead because of the unrelinquished territorial ambitions of Israel or because of ideological affinity of some groups with what Israel is doing, but also because there are companies who are profiting from it. And excuse me, I record the offensive and rude posture that has come from some of these companies in reaction to my report, like Google. But look, I'm also a user of Google. I don't want the end of Google. I want Google to stop being, making profits by supporting a government that has killed 60,000 people, including 18,000 children. Is it too much to ask?
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I'll just bring in
much
one
to
thing.
say.
And I'll go to you, Nicholas. This unification of anti-Semitism, anti-capitalism, and this general sort of anti-Western view. Again, sort of also she says it like kind of weirdly, like she believes there is a genocide, but she likes Google. There is this company that, in her words, actively supports genocide, but she likes it. She would just like them to stop.
Well, and that's the tell. That's the tell of what you're really looking at. She knows that she's on shaky ground because she uses Google. Okay, she knows that the world uses Google and has Microsoft or Apple on its desktops. So she knows that the company that she's going after are culturally part of the world and irreplaceable. If you shut down these companies, what would we have? A lot of bad things. But she doesn't want them, you don't get to use your Microsoft operating system in Israel. Even if you alleged that there was, in fact, war crimes being conducted by Israel, how do you show Microsoft's complicity in those crimes if it's just selling operating systems to be used as operating systems. So there's a clear disconnect. So even if you grant her premise, it's still flawed. But why grant her premise? What she's really doing is she's wrapped up in the Marxist colonialist rhetoric that dominates the culture today, and she's using that ideological infrastructure to impose restraints and constraints on Israel and seek punishment against Israel for really the act of defending itself. And at some point, you have to say enough is enough. And so, the UN has enabled her. It's given her a mandate. It's given her a platform to sprout this stuff. She shouldn't be, on a college campus, let alone, speaking from the UN, as bad as the UN is. And yet here she is. So, what does she deserve? I think everything that she's getting from the U.S., which is you're not allowed in this country anymore. You're not a fair player. You're not serving anyone's rational interests, and it's time to strip away the pretense.
I mean, I just say I see that, but I also see someone saying, "Well, the U.S. says they stand for free speech." Up until someone says something that they don't agree with, then they just ban them. And while still embracing and endorsing and sanctioning the UN itself.
It's her active step. You could argue it's her active step. So it's not just her speech. She's not merely condemning Israel, but she's attempting to attack U.S. corporations for things that are not crimes. There's nothing in the, just quickly scanning, running her thing through AI and trying to come up with like what U.S. law does this trigger. It keeps on coming up 000, and so the U.S. has intelligently built a system that shields its productive entities from unjust accusations. Individuals can be punished and sanctioned for participation in genocide, should it exist. I mean, there could be some American who was, an idiot dancing around in Rwanda when the Hutus were slaughtering the Tutsis or whatever. I might be getting it wrong. So there may be a practical need to have certain laws, but do they operate the way that she describes against corporations that are not participating in anything one way or another? No. So
yeah,
it's just
or you mentioned the person or an American citizen going and visiting the Houthis and then visiting Nasrallah's funeral. I still believe Israel had an opportunity to do a great deal of fun when it came to Nasrallah's funeral, and unfortunately it missed. I'm
always like, where's the 500-pound bomb when you need one? Because they're all gathered,
And so one more thing she said that I caught, she said, I want to stop the regime that killed 60,000 people, including, I think she's like 18,000 children. Now, that number, well, first, false, but whatever, that number includes about 20,000 Hamas members. And is that what she finds objectionable? The fact that Israel is actively pursuing a war, defending itself? Because she said every single person that basically on October 7, according to her, Israel should have surrendered, right? And not even kill the people who are actively in Israel, because those are included in those numbers. Alejandro, what else?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Alejandro, what else can this be than just an straight up anti-Semitic attack on Israel, basically saying, no, you cannot defend yourself, get attacked, and go home?
Well, certainly. I at the beginning of this show, I compared her to Will Durant, and I think she is that. The real motivation of her, I'm not interested in. But certainly she serves in the worst to expound and explain and give voice to the propaganda of Hamas. She's essentially putting herself on the side of the really, really, really bad people and giving them a voice. Now, maybe as a comment on what she said on the video that we saw, I'm really interested in how they have been trying to make parallels between Gaza and the apartheid in South Africa. I think because they see the apartheid boycott and all the movement that happened over there to try when they try to extinguish it, to boycott it as something very powerful and very successful. However, I mean, we have talked about that in the past in the show. There are no similarities. There is no way in which you can equate both of these situations. The only thing, and that should be mentioned, is that I blame a lot of this on Israel, because they have not been dealing this in an overwhelming way in which they have ended up the conflict. I'm really, ever since I heard about the Palestinian case, I was really shocked about why on earth you don't go to war with these people and end up things for last time, and instead you build some walls. And why on earth you have this weird thing that it's a country which is not the country in the West Bank? Why on earth is that happening over there? And it's not just okay, these hours now, you had your chance, this is over, we are the government now. I'm really shocked by that. And in essence, what's happening over there is that Israel hasn't had the balls to end up with a conflict. And that's the crime where all this, and that's a Pandora's box from which all this fake guilt is coming up from. And think about that. No Albanese could thrive, could survive, could say anything if Israel had won the war decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And on some level, Israel is also trying to fight this in a similar way America is. I believe Francesca Albanese is also sanctioned by Israel, has been for quite some time, as well as, for example, UNRWA has been, but it has never left the UN. The last time I remember Netanyahu being at the UN, he talked about how he simply wants peace. He talked about how he wants normalizations with Saudi Arabia. Just a reminder, when he started his speech, almost everybody left the room because they wouldn't listen to him. And when he mentioned Saudi Arabia, the camera pointed at Saudi Arabian seat and nobody was there because they left also. So yeah, Israel has all the material support it would need. It has all the sort of ability to do what is necessary, but it still is lacking the moral clarity when it comes to finally finishing what needs to be done. Jonathan?
Yeah, well, just to say, I mean, it's why Miss Albanese can reference Israel's the casualties from Israel's self-defense, and not even mention the context in which Israel was forced to undergo those, create those casualties. She completely omits the fact that Israel was attacked in, I believe, what's now known as the bloodiest day against Jews, since the Holocaust. So Dr. Peikoff once said, out of context, anyone can prove anything. And this is just another example of it. She's able to kind of paint the Palestinians, these poor, helpless victims of Israel's relentless aggression. But at no point does she say, well, maybe Hamas should surrender. Maybe Hamas should release the hostages. Maybe Hamas should, wave the white flag and, stop attacking Israel. That's not on her plate at all. So I still think the simply participating in the UN is the issue here. And if Trump really wanted to do something ballsy, I think he would withdraw completely, kick them out, and let them convene, any other place in the world without the U.S. and other freedom-loving countries. And I do think Ms. Rand would support that as well, my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something he maybe could just do, since President of the United States is the chief diplomat. I think I don't even know what I don't think Constitution even says anything about international organizations or how that whole thing should be done. Maybe Nicholas.
We're in there by treaty, so the Congress would have to pass.
Okay, so okay,
yeah.
Well,
I'm assuming we're in there by treaty. I can 95% say we're in there by treaty, which means Congress would have to.
Well, it's a Republican Congress. I think we can also achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like in an abusive relationship. You talk about it, but then you never leave. And Why is that? It would be interesting to hear, the other side explain exactly what are the huge benefits that we get out of the UN that outweigh nonsense like Miss Albanese and, all the dictatorships lined up there condemning the U.S. and Israel for this, that, and the other thing. It's interesting. The U.S. is not, so I'm looking it up, and the U.S. is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. It uses it on occasion in a contextual sort of way when the court is handling a case that interests it. But in fact, because it was a problem during the U.S. Invasion of Iraq, Congress passed a law saying that we would extract any American who had been unfairly subject to its jurisdiction. So, and that makes sense because of the inherent problems of asking a bunch of criminals to judge a criminal matter. And that's a fool's errand, and it really can't be fixed. It's interesting how Albanese uses her Marxist anti-colonialism to attack Israel. Again, there's no mention of Hamas in her report. The word Hamas does not appear. Normally when you're dealing a case, there's always the other side's argument. And you want to address the other side's arguments, and you want to be the one to tell the other side's arguments before they do, to kind of set the context so that you're showing you're not evading these facts, you're addressing them. But she's so stunningly dishonest that she doesn't even attempt to do that. So again, there's no context for, well, why on earth would the Israelis be in Gaza right now? What's the but-for causation there? And the but-for causation that we all know, and anybody with two brain cells to rub between themselves in their head, is Hamas's brutal, disgusting attack on October 7th that demands retribution. And that the casualties caused to the innocents, the so-called innocents in the war, who are not combatants, who are not carrying arms against Israel, are because Hamas fighters surround themselves and make it next to impossible for Israel to attack the Hamas soldiers without imposing collateral costs. These collateral costs are owned by Hamas. Hamas is solely responsible for them. If there's any exceptions, they're few and far between, and result 9 times out of 10 out of inadvertent error. But, she doesn't even attempt to address these facts, these issues. So, I mean, that she has any platform, and if the U.S. is paying for it, or Israel's having to pay for it through its participation in the UN, then that's a moral inversion. So I was worried that this group would be like, well, I'm not so sure about the UN. I'm glad, this is a good group, because, I coming in, I don't know, are these guys going to go for it? No, the UN's a disaster. And I'm completely with you guys on it. And, what's there to say?
Yeah, and I want to go to a little bit more of the video, but first let me remind people that today's episode of The Daily Objective is sponsored by The Objectivist's Guide to the Galaxy. If you're an objectivist, a scientist, both or neither, I think you can find out a lot of great stuff in this book. It's slightly inspired by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So in the book, you have 42 chapters, 42 questions, sort of answering or giving the answers to life and everything on Earth. So I definitely recommend checking it out. It's still on for just $1 on Kindle, but it's also available in its paperback and hardback versions. So The Objectivist Guide to the Galaxy, Amazon link is in the chat and in the description. And with that, let's listen to just a bit more of her, because I think there was something I wanted to comment on.
So, of course, the sanctions are going to affect me, and they are not going to stop my quest for respect of justice and international law, as I've been mandated to do by the Human Rights Council.
A lot to pick up on from what you've said. You said that you're still evaluating the impact of the sanctions. Do you know, for example, if you will be denied visas to the US, how it's going to impact your work? If you can't go to UN headquarters in New York, for example.
Well, the fact that I cannot go to the UN in New York seems to be a smaller problem than the Palestinians in Gaza being killed by something that is called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which in fact is a death trap, which has completely obliterated the concept of humanitarian action that should have been provided by or taken by the United Nations. I mean,
okay, I think she like covered everything in that about 30 seconds. So first, one thing I think, yeah, I am kind of sad that she cannot go to the UN, but I believe there should be sanctions. Let's move the UN out of the New York. Let's put it somewhere else, and then she can visit it. Not to mention, I'm not even sure how often she visits the actual UN headquarters, since she works for the humanitarian Human Rights Council, which I believe is Geneva in Switzerland. So that's where you always see her. So this wouldn't matter either way. And then she talks about how Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which again was what was set up by Israel with the help of the US to basically distribute the aid directly instead of through organizations that have repeatedly been shown to work with Hamas, have been repeatedly shown to basically have their aid stolen by Hamas, and then Hamas using that aid to basically continue war. And now just take this whole idea. She said Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was a death trap. This has to be anti-Semitism. Imagine this idea. Okay, Israel starts a war, but instead of bombing all of them, they won't. They'll drag the war for 2 hours, and then they'll set up humanitarian corridors where when Palestinians come in, they'll start killing them in the groups of 2 or 3. This is what she's saying. It's incredibly stupid. If Israel wanted to wipe out Palestinians, it would have already been able to do so. This can only come from some idea of anti-Semitism. Basically, this like evil Jews like scheming about how to kill Palestinians in a unique way. Nicholas, any comments on any of the points she brought up?
Well, I guess it really goes down to the point where at a certain point in analyzing her, she's beneath contempt because she's just so bad. I was struck by how the reporter and Albanese throw out genocide really without much qualification, and the fact that they're doing this leads me to conclude that how bad Al Jazeera is propagandizing against Israel. Because if you can just throw out genocide without having to do a dance explaining it clearly and cogently, then that means that this view is accepted among their viewership, and that they can say it uncontroversially, and it should be. So how do we make it controversial again? I think it's a classic show me your evidence, show me your facts. By any moral standard, by what right? How on earth was October 7th acceptable, and what right did Israel have to retaliate and defend itself in order to destroy the institution that led to the slaughter? I mean, I'm just struck how she can sit there with a straight face knowing that the cause of this conflict was an organization whose soldiers were willing to put babies in ovens as a laugh, and then call their mom and say, "Look, Ma, isn't this great?" I mean, that's just horrific to me. And so how utterly disconnected from reality do you have to be? And I'm very sympathetic to Alejandro's view, where it's just like, screw these people. It just forget it. It's not even worth it's beneath me to think about it. And I'm sympathetic to that, absolutely, because I mean, it's just so bad. I'm at a loss for words to describe evil, because it's just, come on.
And that's why I'm in that camp as well. I think the sanctions are milquetoast, and a real moral action from the U.S. government and perhaps the U.K. as well would be to leave the UN. They can do it as, say, I don't know, suspend our membership, or indefinite leave or something like that. But say that we are not going to be part of these organizations, which are which legitimize the worst dictatorships on earth. We're not going to sit around the table with them like they're normal dictatorships. At some point, Rand writes about them being outlaw dictatorship or outlaw countries. And I mean, that's how I look at Putin's Russia or today's North Korea. I mean, these are outlaw dictatorships. They're not legitimate countries that you can sit around and be part of an organization with. So I'm all for let these people make their speeches and have their proclamations and do their little criminal courts and all that, but do it somewhere outside the U.S. and don't have the U.S. or the U.K. be part of it.
Alejandro?
Well, I completely agree with my peers. I have not much to add, but except that it's true. The legitimacy of countries like the UK, the US, France are what makes the UN worth being heard. If all of those countries left, and essentially there would be no legitimacy to this organization, which in itself gives legitimacy to people like Albanese. And to think about that, to concretize that, do you know who the spokesperson of BRICS is, or of all these CIS organizations? Nobody knows who they are because they're essentially compendiums of worthless countries. It's only because you have worthy institutions over there that they have something to be heard for.
Yeah, and just to use the other example, there is an actual Arab League. Nobody ever hears about it because it's not able to do anything because it has no sanctions of the Western countries. Nicholas, any last thoughts and where can people find you?
I am on Substack and always happy to engage people there.
Jonathan?
Well, thanks to all of our watchers. We've got over 130 people watching live. Hit the like button, share the show, and become a regular contributor to the Ayn Rand Center UK. I've got a bunch of books. My most recent is called Can You Really Love a Dog? Dr. Peikoff himself wrote it, and it's available on Amazon. Highly recommended.
Alejandro?
Boycott the UN.
And let me remind people once again, the Irreplaceable Spark Conference takes place later in this year, October 25th and 26th. It's a weekend conference, so you don't have to miss work. You just fly in and then fly out. It's going to happen in Orange County, Southern California. To find out more, just visit the link, objectivism.co.uk. With that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye-bye.